Human beings have fought countless battles across history. They have struggled against wild nature, against other tribes and nations, against hunger, cold, disease, and injustice. Yet, if we strip away all appearances, the fiercest enemy has always been much closer than we imagine. It is not an army that besieges the walls, not a tyrant that oppresses from above, not even the blows of fate. The truest adversary of man is himself. This truth is not modern, nor is it born of temporary hardship. From the earliest thinkers of Greece to the Stoic sages of Rome, from the penetrating reflections of Schopenhauer to the psychological insights of Freud, philosophers have always returned to the same conclusion. The root of our struggle lies within. The most dangerous battlefield is not the plain or the arena, but the silent chambers of the human soul. Socrates and the path of self-knowledge. The old sage of Athens, Socrates, never wrote a book, but his words, preserved by Plato and others, continue to resound through the centuries. His famous exhortation, "Know thyself," carved at the entrance of the Delphic temple, is not a mere invitation to curiosity. It is a commandment, a call to confront the deepest enemy, ignorance of our own nature. For Socrates, a person who does not know himself is like a warrior entering battle blindfolded. How can he hope to defend himself, let alone triumph, if he does not even see the source of danger? Socrates warned, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This stark sentence shows that without self-knowledge, our existence drifts without compass, subject to desires, fears, and impulses we neither understand nor master. Ignorance of the self becomes fertile soil where the inner enemy grows strong. The man who has not studied his own motives will easily be enslaved by them. He will call freedom what is in truth addiction, and he will mistake true good for fleeting pleasures. Thus, the inner adversary gains power, not through force, but through our blindness. The Stoics and the art of mastery. Several centuries after Socrates, the Stoics deepened this insight. They proclaimed that the true chains of man are not forged by circumstances, but by his own passions. Epictetus, once a slave, became one of the freest men in history, precisely because he mastered himself. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." This principle, at first glance severe, is in truth liberating. To the Stoics, the world is filled with things beyond our control: storms, illnesses, poverty, political turmoil, the opinions of others. To fight against these is madness, like trying to command the sea or order the stars. But there is one kingdom that belongs entirely to us: our judgments, our choices, our inner responses. There, and only there, is the battle against the enemy within. Seneca reminded us, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more in imagination than in reality." Here the Roman sage reveals the subtle power of the inner enemy. It distorts reality. What harms us is not the event itself, but the story we tell ourselves about it. The man who loses wealth may see it as the end of life, while another views it as liberation from burdens. Both faced the same fact, but one was defeated by his own judgment. The Stoics practiced daily exercises to weaken this enemy. Each evening they reviewed their actions, seeking where anger, greed, or fear had overpowered reason. They trained themselves to imagine loss, pain, or death in advance, not to summon despair, but to be ready, to meet fate as a friend, not as a tyrant. Thus they transformed the enemy within into a teacher, a stern but wise guide. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and disciple of Stoic philosophy, wrote in his private reflections, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. A ruler of vast lands, he discovered that the only empire truly worth governing is the inner one. His reign over himself was the true model of his reign over the world, the shape of the inner enemy. What is this adversary that haunts us from within? It is not a single thing, but a legion. Desire that pulls us toward illusions, fear that paralyzes, anger that blinds, envy that poisons, pride that deceives, despair that consumes. Each of these forces lives in the heart of man, and each can overthrow him if left unchecked. The Stoics did not ask us to destroy these passions completely, for they are woven into human nature. Instead, they taught the art of mastery. Desire, when controlled, can drive noble action. Anger, when tempered, can give strength against injustice. Fear, rightly understood, can protect from rash folly. The inner enemy becomes destructive only when it rules instead of serving. Thus, the struggle within is not the eradication of our humanity, but its elevation. The one who conquers himself is not cold, but free. He does not drift from pleasure to pleasure like a slave of the senses, nor does he cower in fear of fate. He walks with clarity, guided by reason and virtue. If the Stoics taught us to divide what lies within our power from what does not, Arthur Schopenhauer leads us deeper into the shadowy realm of desire itself. For the German philosopher, the root of human suffering does not rest in external events, nor even in our judgments alone, but in something more primal, more relentless, the will. Schopenhauer and the tyranny of the will. Schopenhauer describes the will as a blind, ceaseless striving that drives every creature. Unlike reason, which can weigh and choose, the will demands endlessly, without pause, without final satisfaction. He wrote, "The will is an endless striving, never finally satisfied, and its satisfaction is always only the beginning of a new desire." Here we meet another mask of the inner enemy. Man believes he seeks happiness, but what he truly chases is the extinguishing of one desire after another. The hunger is never appeased. It merely changes form. Today he craves wealth, tomorrow recognition, the next day love, and once those are attained, fresh desires arise, often stronger than the last. Thus the enemy enslaves us not with chains of iron, but with invisible bonds of longing. Schopenhauer compared life to a pendulum, swinging between pain and boredom. Pain when we lack what we desire, boredom when we have it. This stark vision is not meant to depress, but to awaken. If our suffering is woven into the very nature of desire, then the path to peace lies not in chasing more, but in restraining and clarifying the will, the illusion of fulfillment. How often does a man whisper to himself, "If only I gain this, then I will be content." Yet when he achieves it, he finds only brief sweetness, followed quickly by restlessness. The will moves the goalpost, demanding more, always more. In this cycle, the inner enemy laughs, for it has captured us without us even noticing. Here lies the danger. We confuse the enemy for a friend. We imagine that desire, by pushing us forward, is our guide toward happiness. Yet desire is more like a thirst that salt water cannot quench. The more we drink, the more parched we become. Schopenhauer pointed to ascetic practices and the contemplation of art as temporary respites from this tyranny. In art, particularly in music, man can forget for a time the ceaseless demands of the will. He glimpses existence beyond craving, a calm silence of the soul. This state reveals that freedom from the inner enemy is possible, though never permanent. The prison of comparison. Another weapon of the inner adversary revealed by Schopenhauer is comparison. We measure ourselves against others, and in this act, suffering multiplies. A man may live in comfort, yet envy his neighbor's fortune. Suddenly his comfort turns to torment. The will not only desires what it lacks, it demands more than others possess. Thus the enemy is cunning. It poisons joy with envy, peace with ambition, abundance with dissatisfaction. As long as our eyes are turned outward, we remain prisoners. The Stoics said the same in another tongue. Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. The German and the Roman, though centuries apart, stand side by side in recognizing that desire, not fate, is the true tyrant. The will as suffering, but also as strength. It would be unjust to present Schopenhauer's vision as pure despair. Though he declared life to be filled with suffering, he also hinted that through awareness of this fact, man may rise above it. To see the will as it is, blind, endless, untamed, is already to loosen its grip. Knowledge becomes the sword with which we fight the inner foe. He wrote, "A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." This paradox reminds us, we do not choose our desires. They spring forth unbidden. Yet we can choose our response to them. Here Schopenhauer meets the Stoics, though from a darker path. We cannot extinguish the will entirely, but we can discipline its power, refusing to let it dictate the course of our life. A shared lesson: freedom through restraint. If Socrates urged us to know ourselves, and the Stoics taught us to govern our judgments, Schopenhauer adds a harsher wisdom. Learn to limit the will. Freedom is not the multiplication of choices, but the mastery of desire. To live by craving is to serve the enemy. To live by restraint is to free oneself from its rule. The inner adversary thus appears in new clothing, not merely as ignorance or poor judgment, but as the restless drive at the heart of existence. To defeat this foe, one must cease feeding it, not by denying life, but by clarifying what is truly necessary and by learning to see desire as it is, fleeting, deceptive, insatiable. Between Stoicism and Schopenhauer. At first glance, Stoic serenity and Schopenhauer's pessimism seem opposed. The Stoics believed in reason and virtue, Schopenhauer in the futility of striving. Yet both converge on a shared truth. Man's greatest enemy dwells within. To conquer him requires neither conquering the world nor collecting its treasures, but turning inward. Seneca declared, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." Centuries later, Schopenhauer echoed, "The man who knows no end to desire is forever enslaved." In this harmony of voices, ancient and modern, we find a single thread. To fight the inner enemy is to fight against excess, illusion, and unexamined longing. The enemy cannot be slain outright, but he can be chained, tamed, and transformed into a servant of wisdom. If Socrates and the Stoics revealed the enemy as ignorance and lack of discipline, and Schopenhauer exposed the tyranny of blind will, then Sigmund Freud entered the battlefield from another gate, the hidden chambers of the unconscious. Where the ancients spoke of reason and passion, Freud gave names to the forces pulling man apart from within: the id, the ego, and the superego. Freud and the theater of the mind. Freud described the psyche not as a unified ruler, but as a contested territory where conflicting powers struggle for dominance. The id, primal and instinctive, demands satisfaction of hunger, lust, aggression. It knows nothing of reason or morality, only the cry, "I want." The superego, on the other hand, embodies conscience, ideals, parental voices, and cultural laws. It says, "You must." Between them stands the ego, fragile mediator, trying to preserve balance, to translate demands into reality. This inner triad is not a metaphor, but the very structure of our daily conflict. Every time we resist temptation, every time we feel guilt or shame, every time we wrestle with a choice, these three voices contend. Thus, the enemy within is not one, but many, a chorus of competing wills, each threatening to overthrow harmony. Freud remarked, "The ego is not master in its own house." These words shatter the illusion of control. Man often imagines himself the captain of his soul, yet much of what he does arises from hidden impulses, disguised desires, unconscious fears. The enemy within is cunning, for it hides beneath masks, whispering thoughts we believe our own. The weight of the superego. While Schopenhauer warned of the endless hunger of desire, Freud showed that the inner enemy is not only excess desire, but also excessive repression. The superego, with its stern moral commands, can be as tyrannical as the id. It torments the ego with guilt, shame, and impossible standards. Thus man is torn not only by lusts and cravings, but by merciless self-condemnation. A man may live a virtuous life and yet feel crushed, not by sin, but by the endless whisper of not enough. The enemy within takes form both as indulgence and as perfectionism. One enslaves by excess, the other by burden. Both rob the soul of peace. Conflict as the human condition. Freud's vision reveals that inner conflict is not a flaw to be eliminated, but the very essence of humanity. To be human is to live in tension between instinct and morality, between desire and duty. The enemy within can never be wholly banished, for it is part of what we are. This truth echoes what the Stoics and Schopenhauer glimpsed. The Stoics trained to master passion. Schopenhauer sought release from the will. Freud recognized the unconscious struggle as endless. Yet in all these visions, wisdom arises not from denial, but from recognition. To name the enemy is to strip it of some power. The masks of the inner enemy. Freud's theory also illuminates why self-deception is so common. The ego, caught between demands, often resorts to defense mechanisms, rationalization, denial, projection. We blame others for what we cannot face in ourselves. We invent noble motives for base desires. We bury painful truths deep in the unconscious. The enemy within thus disguises itself, forcing us to fight shadows instead of substance. Socrates urged us to know thyself. Freud makes clear how difficult this is, for the self is not transparent. To know oneself requires courage to face uncomfortable truths, that our thoughts are not fully ours, that our noblest acts may hide selfish motives, that our reason is often servant to desire. Only by tearing away these veils can we approach genuine self-knowledge. The cost of repression. Freud warned that denying the inner enemy only makes it stronger. Repressed desires do not die. They return in distorted forms, in dreams, in slips of the tongue, in sudden bursts of anger or anxiety. The enemy ignored becomes the enemy disguised. Thus, to conquer oneself is not to bury instincts, but to confront and integrate them. This insight brings Freud surprisingly close to the Stoics, though by a different road. Epictetus taught that we should distinguish what lies within our control. Freud shows that to control, we must first recognize. We cannot govern what we refuse to see. The inner adversary, whether passion or conscience, must be acknowledged, examined, and placed in its proper role. The ego's task. Balance, not victory. Freud never promised peace through conquest. The ego cannot destroy either the id or the superego, for both are integral to human life. Desire drives creativity, passion, vitality. Conscience provides morality, structure, civilization. To annihilate one is to cripple the whole. The ego's task is therefore balance, to mediate, to negotiate, to transform raw impulses into meaningful action, to soften rigid commands into humane ideals. In this vision, victory over the inner enemy is not absolute triumph, but wise management. We become not dictators of the soul, but skillful rulers, harmonizing conflict into strength. The Stoics called this virtue, Freud called it maturity. Both point to the same summit, mastery not by domination, but by understanding. The endless battle as the path to growth. It may seem discouraging that man is never free of the enemy within. Yet there is a hidden gift here. Without conflict, there is no growth. Without tension, no progress. Just as muscles grow through resistance, the soul matures through inner struggle. To fight oneself is not a curse, but a calling. Freud opened a new dimension of this ancient battle, showing that our greatest victories may come not from conquering the world, but from reconciling the voices within us. The id gives fire, the superego gives form, and the ego learns the art of shaping both into a life worth living. Throughout the long journey of philosophy, from the dusty streets of Athens to the study chambers of Vienna, one truth echoes. Man's most formidable adversary is not outside, but within. The names and descriptions differ: ignorance, passion, will, unconscious conflict, yet all point to the same battlefield, the soul. A chorus of voices. Across time, Socrates urged, "Know thyself." For him, ignorance of one's own nature was the greatest danger. Without self-knowledge, man becomes prey to his own impulses, believing he acts freely while he is in fact enslaved. The Stoics declared, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." They taught that the inner enemy thrives when we confuse external misfortune with internal defeat. By mastering judgment, man masters himself. Schopenhauer exposed the will as a merciless tyrant, driving us from desire to desire. He revealed that fulfillment through craving is an illusion. To restrain the will is not to weaken life, but to liberate it from endless dissatisfaction. Freud unveiled the unconscious stage where id, ego, and superego contend. He showed that repression and denial give the enemy strength, while recognition and integration give us balance. Though these thinkers differ, together they weave a single message. The greatest danger to man's freedom and happiness is not the blows of fate, but his inability to govern himself. The shape of the inner enemy. What, then, is this enemy? It has many masks. In Socrates' teaching, it is ignorance, blindness to the truth of oneself. In the Stoics' wisdom, it is passion unruled, judgment unchecked. In Schopenhauer's philosophy, it is restless will, ceaseless craving. In Freud's psychology, it is unconscious conflict, guilt, repression. Each description is a facet of the same reality. Man is both his own master and his own saboteur. He carries within him the seeds of destruction and the seeds of wisdom. Which shall grow depends on the choices he makes daily. Practical paths to victory. How then can we confront and overcome this inner adversary? The voices of the sages converge into a set of disciplines. Self-examination. Socrates demanded that we interrogate ourselves, for an unexamined life drifts aimlessly. Daily reflection reveals where the enemy has gained ground. Discipline of judgment. The Stoics taught us to separate what lies in our power from what does not. In this distinction lies freedom. By governing our responses, we deny the enemy his greatest weapon: distorted perception, restraint of desire. Schopenhauer warned against the tyranny of endless craving. By reducing wants, we increase freedom. To desire less is not poverty, but wealth of spirit, integration of the unconscious. Freud urged us not to deny hidden impulses, but to recognize them. Only through awareness can the ego balance the demands of instinct and conscience. Denial breeds monsters. Recognition breeds strength. Cultivation of virtue. For the ancients, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance were the shields against inner chaos. To practice virtue daily is to weaken the adversary and fortify the soul. The paradox of the enemy within. Yet here lies a paradox. The enemy within is also our greatest teacher. Without ignorance, we would not seek knowledge. Without passion, we would not strive for mastery. Without desire, we would not learn restraint. Without conflict, we would not mature. The foe we battle is also the fire that tempers us. This is why the struggle never ends, nor should it. To defeat the inner enemy, once and for all, would be to cease being human. Our greatness lies not in final victory, but in the courage to fight daily, to rise each time we fall, to refine ourselves again and again. Freedom through mastery. The ancients called the highest state ataraxia, tranquility of soul. For Schopenhauer, it was release from the tyranny of will. For Freud, maturity of the ego. For the Stoics, harmony with reason and nature. All point to the same summit: freedom through self-mastery. True freedom is not doing whatever one pleases. That path leads only to slavery under desires. True freedom is mastery over oneself. The ability to choose rightly, to remain calm in storms, to act with justice and wisdom despite temptations. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." These words, though simple, carry the weight of centuries. For freedom is not granted by kings or laws, but won in the silent struggle of the soul, the eternal battle and the eternal reward. Every morning we wake, the battle begins anew. The enemy whispers, "Chase this pleasure, fear this loss, envy this success, despair at this failure." And every day we have the chance to answer, "No, I will govern myself. I will live by reason, not illusion, by virtue, not passion." This is the true heroism, greater than conquest of nations or command of armies. To rule oneself is the highest empire. To master the enemy within is to unlock strength unshaken by fate, serenity untouchable by fortune, and wisdom enduring beyond time. A final harmony. Let us hear once more the chorus across the ages. Socrates, know thyself. Epictetus, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Seneca, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Schopenhauer, the will is an endless striving, never finally satisfied. Freud, the ego is not master in its own house. Each voice sings in its own key, but together they form a single hymn. Man must confront himself, for within himself lie both his chains and his wings. The greatest enemy of man is himself, but he is also his greatest ally. For in fighting the inner foe, man forges character. In mastering desire, he discovers peace. In reconciling inner conflict, he grows into wholeness. And so the final lesson resounds. To live is to battle, but to battle with wisdom is to live well. The enemy within can never be fully silenced, but he can be mastered. And in that mastery lies not only freedom, but greatness.